Hello and welcome to Paula Armstrong Ceramics. So for this video I thought I would make a fairly simple slab building project, but with a bit of a twist. So I'm going to make a cup, but the twist to the cup is I want it to have slightly sloping sides, and there's a trick to this, and so I'm going to have a go at making one for you. I hope you enjoy. Okay. So the first thing we're going to do is to roll out our clay, and we're just going to roll a little bit at a time. So we're not trying to get it to the thickness that we want as fast as we possibly can. We're trying to roll it a little bit and then flip it over and roll in the opposite direction. And what this does is help keep the tension in the clay even across both sides, both surfaces of the clay. It also helps with making sure that the thickness is even by rolling in different directions, and you don't end up with hollows and high pieces. So as you go, you roll a little bit, and then you flip over. Once you reach a point where it's quite a large piece of clay, it's best not to try and pick up the clay with your fingertips like that, because you can stretch the slab. What you want to do is lift it using the fabric and put it onto your arm so that you can then lay it back, flip it over and lay it back down. Make sure that there are no creases in the fabric underneath, and then carry on rolling. We're aiming for something quite fine for this, because the thickness of this slab is going to be the thickness of the sides of the cup. So we want to balance something that looks and feels quite refined to drink from with the practicalities of building it. The thinner the clay is, the harder it is to build with it, because it's very flexible and floppy as you build, whereas if it's a bit thicker, it will hold its form better, but you end up with a cup with a thicker side. This is not necessarily a problem, but you can build with a thicker side and then just thin the rim down slightly by pinching it, which I will show you at the end as an option. That's probably the best way to go for a beginner. Once you get the hang of it, then you can try building with the slightly thinner clay. So I am looking at clay that's probably about 3 or 4 millimeters thick here. Just to finish off the rolling, if you roll lightly in different directions across the surface of the clay, it can help even out all the thicknesses. So once we have our slab all rolled out, we now need to cut out the 2 sections that we're going to need to make our cup. The first one is easy. We're just going to use our circle cookie cutter to cut out the base. Now, as I've got an extended amount of clay on this side of the slab, I'm going to take it from near the edge so that I'm not taking away any clay that I might be using for the other piece. I'm then going to put that onto my board and put it to one side for the moment. Now, the trick for making a cup with the sloping sides is that we don't want to cut a straight rectangle. that will just give us a straight cylinder. We need a slightly curved shape. The more you curve it, the steeper the sides of your cup will go. So the wider the top will be in comparison to the bottom. So I don't want this to be too steep of an angle. So I'm going to go quite a shallow curve. And I'm just drawing with my finger on the clay for now to give me a marker point. And I'm going to trim with a knife where that curve is. Now I need enough of this curve to be able to do the full circumference of the cookie cutter. So I have a point here where I've got a little bit of extra slip that's just on the cookie cutter. So I'm just going to run a check to make sure that what I've put down is enough to get all the way around. Yes, it is. So I've got a little bit extra actually here. Now I'm going to put a second curve at the top here, and the distance between the two curves is going to be the height of your cup. Now it's better to go with slightly taller than you want than slightly shorter, because it's much easier to trim down if it's too tall than to add on if it's too short. So we want to try and keep the curve parallel so that I'm following the same shape. So again, I'm doing all this by eye. You can, if you want, make a paper template. So you could do all of this on paper first and cut the shapes out on the paper and make sure that they work for the size of cup that you want and that they all fit together. And then you just put the paper template onto the clay and trim around it. Okay, so I'm now going to put a straight side between the two lines on this one. Again, at a slight angle, so it's basically 90 degrees to the angle of this bottom line upwards to the top line. And I had a bit of extra space when I rolled the cookie cutter here, so I don't need the full extent of this. So I am going to stop where my cookie cutter mark is there and do the same thing with this side with the 90-degree line out. So what I end up with is a curved rectangle shape like that, along with a circle base. Okay, so our next step is to assemble our cup. Although I will add at this point, if you wanted to put texture or imprints on the outside of your cup, you can do that on the slab while it's laying down at this point. If you try and do it once you've built the cup, you'll find that it might well alter the shape. But if you do it at this point, if it pushes the edges out, you can literally just use a knife to trim it back to shape for yourself. So I am going to wrap this slab around the base slab. So I want to score the edges that are going to stick together. So I'm just going to lightly score all around the edge of the circle base. You don't need to go too deep when you're scoring. We are literally scoring the surface. And then where the slab is going to wrap, it's going to sit there. So I just need to do some score lines on this edge as well. And then where we've scored, we add some slip. I tend to make my slip quite thick so it's not too runny, and it fills in the lines of the score marks that I've just made. Okay, so we now want to get this slab to wrap around the base. I'm going to lift using the palms of my hands. I'm trying not to pick up with my fingertips like this because that will stretch the slab of clay. So I'm going to use both hands underneath and then stand the slab onto the back of the circle and line it up, and then literally wrap it around. And you can see, even with as shallow as my curve was, this is still quite steeply angled sides for a cup. Okay. So I'm overlapping each of the sides here. And then I'm going to trim through both and all the way to the bottom without going through the base. So I'm going to pull the blade out so that it doesn't cut the base off at the bottom. And then take away the excess from both sides, score the edges of both of these sides. Pop some slip on. And then the two edges should slot together. Using your fingertips gently to push them into place. I'm then going to use nails or a tool. You just slightly scrape over the line to make the join disappear. We can then blend across the top and the same thing on the inside. As you're doing the blending, it's helpful if you have a hand on the opposite side to do support so that you don't stretch your clay as you're blending it together. Try not to press down, so as I'm blending, I'm not pushing the clay out, I'm scraping across the surface. Again, so that this doesn't stretch the clay out of shape as I'm doing it. And then we smooth. And that's our basic shape made. Okay. So now we've got our shape built, our next stage is to reinforce the joins that we've put on our slab build. So I've taken one of the pieces that I've cut off when I did the sides on the cup, and I'm just going to cut off a little strip. And then this strip I'm going to pinch to make it a little bit thinner and wider all the way along. I'm going to use some slip, put it down the inside of the upright joint, so the vertical join, and then I'm going to drop the strip down so that it covers where the joint was. If I turn that around, hopefully you might be able to see in there. I'm going to take the excess off the top and then gently blend this strip. Again, supporting with my hand behind while I use the other hand to blend. You can use wooden modelling tools at this point, or any other kind of flat bladed tool to help blend, or you can do like me and use your fingers and your nails. And you want to do this until it's all done, all the way to the bottom. Again, try not to squish or press too hard. What you're after is scraping across the surface. And what this extra clay does is reinforce the join so that we are less likely to get cracks and problems in the kiln when we fire it. Now where I've pressed on the inside, it's opened up the join a little bit on the outside, so I need to go back in and just again support behind and blend across just to seal that back up. We don't want to be able to see where the join is. We want it to look like it was made from one piece. If you have a rubber kidney as a tool, you could use that at this point to do some smoothing as well. Okay, the other joint in our cup is obviously around the bottom. So for this one, I'm going to trim another slice off, but I'm then going to roll and turn this into a small coil. And then the same again in terms of adding a bit of extra slip all around the join that we want to reinforce, so all around that bottom. So I've gone all around the bottom of the circle here, and then I'm just going to put my coil inside and then push it into place with my fingers. If you've got a bit of extra, you can just trim it off and take it out. Okay, so I hope you can see the coil in the bottom there. And then the next job is to again support on the outside and blend that coil into place. Now I find actually at this point, particularly with the bottom, that using a tool is much easier than my fingers, because getting inside that space can be tricky. So I am going to grab a wooden tool, but if you can get in there with your fingers are fine. If you're using a tool, the same applies. You support the outside while you're working on the inside just the same. For a cup, this particular reinforcement is important because it can help with making sure that the cup doesn't leak once it's fired, as we're reinforcing this bottom join and hopefully making it so that the water doesn't come through. Okay. Once I've got it all blended, I'm going to go in with my finger and just tidy up a little bit. You want that bottom to be as tidy as you can, because we don't want any textures on the inside that are going to make cleaning the cup difficult. So there we go. We've got the inside of the cup all blended. We can turn the cup over at this point and make sure that the side walls, if you can see that on the camera there, you can still see the base slightly separate to the side walls there. So we want to blend them in so that it becomes one piece. And this helps reinforce this base join as well, which helps with the water not leaking out. So we're just going to take the bottom edge and blend it in towards the center of the base over the joint. Once it's smooth, we can tip our cup back. When you're handling the cup, remember not to use your fingertips. Always use your full hands so that everything is moving and you're not putting pressure on one particular place. Now that I have my cup, you can see that the top is not even. So I'm going to trim this down to level it up. My cup is also a very big cup, so I don't want a cup that's quite this big. So I want to take it down enough to make it into a cup that's about the size that I would like to hold. Now the easiest way I find to do that is to take my potter's knife, anchor my arm against the table, so either with your elbow or part of your arm, so that you can hold your hand steady. Line the blade up with your cup, hold the knife and your hand steady with one, and use the other one to turn the cup against the blade. And I'm just marking the clay at this point. I am not cutting through, and you should be able to find a point where you mark all the way around and it is level. At this point, you have your line in place, so you can take your blade, cut through the clay and just slice. Don't saw if you can help it, you just want to slice, because if you saw, you will end up with the saw marks on the edge where you've cut. And you want to follow this line all the way around. Now we should have a cup that's fairly level. This rim is still a little bit on the thick side for what I would like to drink from. So I'm going to flare it out a little bit while I make it a bit thinner. To start with, I'm gently going to pinch around this top edge. And I'm going to do that all the way around. Do it a little bit at a time, don't pinch too hard. We're only after ever such a slight thinning of the clay. Once I've gone all the way around, I'm going to stroke around part of the section between that I've just pinched between my thumb and forefinger, and then run a finger over the top edge to tidy the edge. And you can feel between your thumb and your forefinger how even the thickness of the clay is. Once it feels nice and even, you move on to the next section and repeat. I can usually do a little under a quarter of the circumference each time I do one of these sections, but it's down to whatever is comfortable for you. I am supporting the clay with my other hand while I do this, because I am dragging as I'm stroking, and I don't want to stretch the main body of the cup while I do this. Just remember to keep paying attention to how thick and even the thickness feels as you do this, because this rim is going to be where you drink from. And there we have it. At this point, it's a good idea to leave it to dry off a little bit so that the clay goes a little bit harder. So I would just put it aside for maybe an hour. And then I come back and tidy everything up. So I'll just run over with my fingers and tidy up. If you're using a smooth clay, it can be worth using a bit of water, but don't use too much. If you use too much, you'll weaken your clay down. And you can just go in and smooth and tidy. can use a dry paintbrush to go around the bottom inside, and that can help tidy inside. It also makes sure that that bottom joint is well blended. Once that's all done, make sure your cup is round again and you're finished. There is the finished cup. It will shrink a bit in the kiln, but it's still a very big cup. I hope you liked it.